Unfortunately for Jackson State, they went to a game where the Grizzlies lost to the New York Knicks. Let's go ahead and jump into our big idea of today. In back-to-back nights, the Grizzlies lose in the final moments of clutch time. First to the Knicks as Jalen Brunson was able to find OG Anunoby after Ja Morant gave the Grizzlies the lead late in this game. OG Anunoby for a late three to take the lead, and then Ja Morant, after making one clutch time basket, couldn't get the lay to go at the buzzer. Knicks would win that one 114-113. Then on Saturday night, taking on the Spurs, the Grizzlies battle back from 20 down, 12 down in the fourth to tie it, only for De'Aaron Fox to send the hometown fans back to the crib, sad with a step-back jumper to give the Spurs a 130-128 lead. Here's Taylor Jenkins and De'Aaron Fox on that game.
I thought the switching was good for us. It's not on Zach. We lost the game because in the second quarter we couldn't guard. So that's what it came down to. End of game, credit Fox, big time player, tried to get the ball out of his hands twice in a row. He rejected and hit a tough step back. That's what he does. We've been in a lot of end of game situations. It's worked for us sometimes and some it hasn't, and we've got to continue to get better in that department. But this game and the Indy game, you give up almost 50 points in a quarter. It's a big hurdle to come over.
Spot like that, we knew they had no timeouts, so you really just try to get up the last shot. And I knew that they would hit, which just means sending a double team. I knew they would do it. So I told them, one, be ready, but two, if I can go get the ball, I'm going to go back and get the ball. So got off of it early. Dev kicked it back to me, and they tried to do it again and just rejected it, tried to get to a spot, tried to get the last shot.
The Grizzlies now 13-14 in clutch time situations. Mike Wall, what went wrong for the Grizzlies in these two matchups in your eyes?
Well, late game execution. You know what I mean? The Grizzlies did what they needed to do to keep themselves in the game, but you can't keep, trailing. You can't keep messing around and going behind.
Looks like Mike might be dealing with a little bit of internet issue over there. Well, to follow up on his point, I think he's exactly right. You are in both of these games at home. We're in FedEx Forum where you have to come back from behind, especially with that Spurs matchup. Looks like Mike Wall's coming back, but let me finish my point real quick. When you're trailing by 20 points in a game to a Spurs team that is really not that great, and then you use all that energy to get back into the game. Jaren Jackson Jr. was amazing, had 42 points. But by then, you've played so much catch-up that when you have to get into a late-game clutch time situation, things may not go your way, and you put yourself in a position to lose that game at home. That was very winnable. Mike, please finish your point. I apologize, brother.
Oh, no. That was on me too, man. It's one of those things where you can't mess around with the schedule right now. We know the Grizzlies are in this stretch right now, 3 games in 4 nights. And you're not sure who's going to be available. Availability got the best of the Grizzlies against the Spurs, where you go back the night before, and it was just one of those situations where the Knicks just out-executed you down the stretch in that situation. So, right now it's been a rough stretch for the Grizzlies. Even in the win over Phoenix, they gave up 148 points. Then you give up 130 plus against the Spurs. You can't give up 110, 120, 130 and expect to beat some of these teams, especially if they're hungry and if they're in the playoff pursuit and they're desperate as well. So defense is the issue for the Grizzlies right now, more so than anything else.
Yeah, you heard it in that clip from Taylor Jenkins there. An almost 50-point quarter to the Spurs, an almost 50-point quarter when they played the Indiana Pacers. They've had a few times this year where they've just given up inexplicable explosions of offense to other teams for what is largely supposed to be one of the better defensive teams in the NBA. But you get into some of these games, especially in the game with the Knicks in particular, where it felt like you were playing pretty good defense, just couldn't get the stops when you needed them in consecutive possessions. What have you seen, Mike, in these last couple of games that hasn't allowed the defense to thrive in ways that we really think it should?
Well, Avery, I'm going to give you credit because you put together inexplicable explosion back to back, right? That takes some talent to be able to enunciate to that level, with all of those syllables.
I learned from the best. I learned from you, brother. Smooth, I read all your words.
So, shout out to you for that. But the thing about it is that, the Grizzlies, the Knicks played at their pace. You know what I mean? The Grizzlies never really got the Knicks uncomfortable at all in that game against them. And, it was just one of those situations where Jalen Brunson, OG Anunoby, Josh Hart, those guys, they control the game. And then when you also give up, some opportunities where their depth And the Knicks don't go deep, but they do have some guys that can come off that bench and really, really, really hurt you. So, when they got that energy boost from some of the guys, Landry Shamet came off the bench and hurt him a little bit. The other guard, number 2, came off the bench and hurt him a little bit. The Grizzlies just didn't have McBride. He didn't have a counter for those guys. And, by the time you got to the Spurs, you were without Dez, you were without Ja, you were without, Brandon Clark and Vince Williams Jr. You were just depleted on the second night of a back-to-back, and that was just too much against a Spurs team that had some younger legs and really wanted to get one, and they needed to get one desperately.
Yeah, you talk about the bench play there in these last couple of games. I mean, Miles McBride, Deuce McBride for the Knicks gave him 17. Really, the Knicks lean really, really heavily on their starting five and not so much on their bench, but they did get a little bit of a boost there. The back-to-back, you guys are nursing injuries. You were talking about Vince Williams all year kind of getting back into the fold, but you're missing Ja Morant in that game dealing with his shoulder. Desmond Bane did not play in this game. Brandon Clark, understandable, brother. You had to get stitches after you got dang near knocked out in the Knicks game, but certainly missing a lot of bodies in that one. But listening to some of the post-game comments, I think about Santi Aldama in particular, just does it feel like the urgency is there for the Grizzlies in some of these games where we know how tight the West is and every game is going to count in a way that's different than if you're playing in the East? Does it feel to you like they had the urgency they needed in this home matchup, home stand rather, when you came out of the East Coast road trip 1 and 2?
Not necessarily. The urgency to defend and on a consistent basis, the urgency to, kind of stick with your game plan. Now, granted, like all of these guys, I used to say this a long time ago, like all of these guys are on scholarship. All of these guys are professional players who you're playing against. So it's not like you could just outwill another team because they want to play too. They want to win too. But when you get your back up against the wall and you have been one of the best teams in terms of the third best record at home at FedEx Forum, that's where you find your comfort. And for the Grizzlies to, kind of wobble along and so far in this homestand, that's not ideal at this stretch of the season when you knew coming out of the All-Star break you were going to have the third toughest schedule in the NBA coming out of the All-Star break. And that trend has continued. The Grizzlies have been able to, up until San Antonio, they've been able to beat the sub-500 teams, and they had a trend of losing to the plus 500 teams. And that's been the case so far over these last 5-10 games. And they got to break out of that, man. They got to continue to take care of business against teams like the Hawks, who are under 500, who they played tonight, and then string together some wins against some of these elite teams. And they'll have a chance on Wednesday to do that against Oklahoma City, a team that's just run away with the West right now.
Yeah, let's go ahead and look at those Western Conference standings while you brought it up. Oklahoma City with a far and above lead over everybody else. 2 losses in a row for the Grizzlies, 4-6 in their last 10. Means they've taken a bit of a slide in the Western Conference standings. Memphis now 4th behind the Thunder, the Lakers in 2nd, and the Denver Nuggets. The Rockets only a 1 game back in 5th place. Clippers, Warriors, and Timberwolves round out the top 8. Mike, how concerning is this slide for Memphis, especially when we weren't really talking about the Lakers before they got Luka Doncic, and now all of a sudden you're looking up at them in 2nd place?
That's the hottest team in the NBA since the trade deadline, and really the hottest team in the NBA over the past month. And they're playing like, this isn't a fluke what the Lakers are doing. I mean, and they're doing this against a number of teams that, are elite. They basically went into Denver and did it against Denver. They're doing it against some of the top teams. So we'll see if they can continue and stay healthy. And they're doing it without a lot of bigs in the middle from that standpoint. If you're the Grizzlies, you haven't played well against the Lakers. You're 1-2 against them. You split with Denver, and they didn't even have Jokic in those games. And then, you're ahead of Houston by 1 game, but you lost 3 out of 4 to them. You don't have the tiebreaker there. So this is a real dangerous spot for the Grizzlies, because if Houston catches them, they lose the tiebreaker, and that's the difference between home court advantage in the 4-5 in that situation. So, and now you're in a month right now where you still have, as we talked about, you in this homestand against Oklahoma City, you play them twice this month. You still play the Lakers. You get Cleveland again, which is a team that has the best record in the league, and you also play Boston. So you have the elite of the elite all crammed into this month of March. This is going to be a gauntlet for the Grizzlies, but it's now or never in terms of whether they want to stay in one of those top 2, 3, 4 seeds.
Yeah, I don't see them sliding past maybe a fourth or a fifth, but you're talking about being second in the West when you enter this weekend. And when you are second in the West, you're avoiding that number 1 seed until the last possible second. Now you're talking about being fourth. You get a 4-5 matchup that, with all intents and purposes, I might have felt better or not as good about the Rockets matchup a month ago or 2 months ago. But now, kind of looking at it, that might be a more favorable matchup in a 7-game series for the Grizzlies, just kind of looking at where the Rockets have been lately and what the Grizzlies have figured out. But when you're in that 2 seed, you don't have to face an Oklahoma City Thunder until the NBA Finals. And what you've done for yourself now is if you slide, another step here in the standings, you're talking about facing them potentially in the second round, which is not what you want to do, and kind of negates so much work that the Grizzlies have done up until this point. So, to your point, you're taking on the elite of the elite. You do have the Thunder on Wednesday, who, I mean, they've been whooping everybody's tail, not just yours. But from what you've seen from Oklahoma City, do you see any chinks in that armor for any team that's got to face them in a 7-game series?
The way that you beat Oklahoma City is you have to be able to stand up to their physicality and inflict some physicality on them. You have to be able to defend them without putting them on the line as best as you can, because they have the ultimate equalizer in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Right now, who's the front runner for MVP? They also have wing players who can knock down threes, and they just get hot. And what they also have is 2 bigs, who can be disruptive at the rim. Hartenstein is a guy that can get you a double-double easily and get a lot of putbacks, stay on the offensive glass. And then, when you talk about Chet Holmgren being, that unicorn in the middle, it's hard to get shots off up against those guys. So they are put together absolutely perfectly when it comes to that. And they've been healthy for a long time. That's the thing, with the exception of Holmgren. So, when you look at them, when you look at what Oklahoma City can do to you, you got to figure out a way to try to beat their physicality. And the Grizzlies are going to have to do that. They have them at home again. You got to win that game at home. So, hey, but look, I wouldn't look past the first round, because we're saying, hey, possibly playing that team in the second round, you want to avoid having a matchup with them in the second round. But these first round matchups are going to be brutal too, because whether you swing and you get the Clippers, that's a team you hadn't matched up against.
Yeah.
If you get 3-6, if you go 4-5, Houston, they've owned this series so far over the past 2 years for the most part. And then, you go 2-7, you got to take one of these hot teams that are coming out of the play-in. And you don't want to see Golden State right now, because they're one of the hottest teams with Jimmy Butler. So it's one of those things where it's not going to be an easy path no matter who lines up where. And that's not for the Grizzlies. That's for everybody in the West.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It doesn't really matter how high a seed you are. Any of those teams coming kind of out of the play-in, and we always talk about rest versus rust in those matchups as well. It kind of seems like whoever is the higher seed has kind of been sitting around watching. You're talking about a team that has kind of figured out what the playoff feel maybe looks like in that first round. Let's talk about what they've got to do tonight. The Grizzlies taking on the Atlanta Hawks, a team that's been very kind of up and down. Very similar to the Grizzlies, but the Grizzlies have a much better record to show for it. Atlanta, another one of those kind of under 500 teams figuring it out. Mike, in your mind, what do the Grizzlies got to do tonight to take care of Atlanta, especially a team with Trae Young, who may be just as dynamic as Ja Morant, maybe in a very different kind of way?
Yeah, I mean, you just got to overwhelm those guys. The Hawks are a team that, they're competitive, but they shouldn't be coming into your building and beating you, right? They just shouldn't. They made a trade, and DeAndre Hunter went from, Atlanta to Cleveland, and he's made a huge difference for the Cavaliers, and so they were, you kind of looked at them as kind of sellers at the trade deadline, and they knew that, look, they still are going to fall into the play-in mix in the Eastern Conference, because the East is forgiving. Chicago is still holding on to the final play-in spot there. So, Atlanta's one of those teams that, they get streaky. Trae Young can shoot it. They do like to rim rim run a lot. They got bigs in Capella and some of the younger athletic guys. Jalen Johnson is one of the best, young players, most improved players that you have in the NBA right there. They have the young rookie, #1 overall pick, Zachary Risache. And, so they have interchangeable parts that can make it uncomfortable for you. A lot like the Spurs. So if you're going to look at what the Spurs was able to do, that's exactly the way that the Atlanta Hawks want to play as well, too. And just substitute De'Aaron Fox for Trae Young. And Trae Young has a three-point ball that extends from half court. So, this is going to be a tricky game, but it's one, if you're the Grizzlies, you got to be desperate, because this is one you need to get after losing these last two. Even though they were one-possession games, they are still games that you lost that you shouldn't have lost on your home court.
Yeah, the Hawks certainly missing a couple of guys. They won't have Jalen Johnson. He's out for the rest of the year dealing with an injury.
Yeah.
They won't have Georges Niang, who they traded for in that trade with the Cleveland Cavaliers to get they sent DeAndre Hunter away. So a couple of guys missing for the Atlanta Hawks. I think you're right. There has to be
they have Karis LeVert, though.
They do have Karis LeVert.
Yeah,
they will have Karis LeVert. So, I think a certain
right.
level of desperation is certainly the appropriate way to put it, because I think when we talked about this homestand that they were entering, which was going to be 5 games, you thought they could get out of it maybe 4-1, maybe 5-0, depending on what goes down with that Oklahoma City game. And now you're staring at it 0-2, or 1-2 rather. And I think that's really frustrating for a team that we think could be somewhere at the top of the standings, a team that says they're serious about contending, but so far have been pretty unserious, at least when it comes out of the All-Star break in this kind of second half of the season. So, Grizzlies take on the Atlanta Hawks tonight, 7 p.m. in FedEx Forum.